Good morning. I have a 3-day weekend, and this weekend I will be reading the Oxford Handbook for the Bronze Age Aegean. That is like the book of the month for June, so I'm gonna try my best to make a dent in it this weekend. And then I'm gonna just continue on my fiction of the month. I'm Quinn. I write queer fairy tales, and I love studying the Bronze Age. I am about to make some coffee right now, have a pastry, specifically a concha that I got for this weekend. I got 3, one for a snack each day. And then I'm gonna begin reading. I'm actually gonna begin setting everything up while I'm eating my concha. It's gonna be a great weekend. I would like to remind everyone, this is my sister's house. I don't own china or china cabinets. So whenever you guys see certain things, as I'm sure you inevitably will, this is my sister's house, not mine. Mini update. First of all, this light is too hot. So I have one of my ring lights next to me. It'll do because I have to get 3 days of reading done. What I've done so far is establish the subjects that I'm interested in. 1 second. And I'm looking at historians of note, specifically the ones that kind of built the foundation of modern day scholarship. Texts of note. Come to find out, the ancient historian that kind of built the chronology of Greece, first of all, was because they all wanted to be heroes. I get it. They wrote Catalogue of Women. It is a 5-part chronology on a catalogue of women. I have to get my hands on that chronology because I have no idea what that could be, but that is what kind of served as the foundation to Greek history back in the day, in the antiquity, as well as the epics of Homer. Therefore, modern scholarships based it on that, and part of the difficulty of the scholarship is what is fiction and what is reality, which ultimately is the difficulty when having to build a factual history based on mythology, right? It was a catalogue of women. I have to go see what that is, and I think I'm gonna be able to find like at least an articled summary of the catalogue of women, because that was pretty awesome. Also, Hesiod. Hesiod? I have no idea who this is. Hold up. Let me set you guys down properly. Hesiod is believed to have been around at the same time as Homer. It's a man. Why would he write a catalogue of women? What is in there? All right, I gotta figure out what this catalogue of women is, but that was pretty freaking fantastic. It's a slow go, but honestly, I am having a blast. I am taking my time. I am loving this just little deep dive. And once I get to my stopping point for like lunchtime, I will kind of give an overview of what the status is of what notes I've been taking. I am about to break for lunch. I'm gonna go have lunch with my sister. And honestly, so this is great. I'm so happy I'm doing this. What's my angle? Whatever, it doesn't matter. So what I have learned, let's see. Of the book, I have gone through a whopping like 30 pages. Anyways, I've gone through the history of research, which was very interesting. I loved seeing, I guess, where we started to where we are. So I got some awesome names for historians of antiquity. I got references for some other like journals that I should read when I get the chance. Understood chronology and terminology, as well as the time periods they both address. I've taken like little snapshots I can quick reference, and then I've tabbed them so that if I forget what EB is, I know that it's like early Bronze Age. EB2 is early Bronze Age, something other, which means this society, which means this time period, right? I am more stuck on the Neolithic antecedents than I thought I would be. It is fascinating for me because humans are so just consistent. Like we're such consistent, unsavory creatures. The Neolithic was written off until like the mid 20th century as like a bunch of villages and a bunch of people that could barely grow some crops, right? No. The Neolithic actually set up for the Bronze Age elite. So I am fascinated because one of my stories is set in the very early Bronze Age. Therefore, for this particular character and their family and their city to have had the influence, unfortunately, it's in the Near East, not in the Aegean. I'll get that book later. Anyways, point being, For this family to have been in power when they were in the early Bronze Age, they had to have the foundations set in the Neolithic to be successful. You don't just wake up in the Bronze Age, 3000 BC, and you're primed for power and all that sort of stuff. No, they needed to have taken the steps to position themselves in places of power so that when the Bronze Age did come, they were the kings, the queens, the rulers of the Bronze Age. That means, I come to find out, in the early Neolithic, everything was communal. There was a huge dependency on community and communal living and like the greater good over the individual. And because of the structure of society, the limitations of technology and other means, there was a limit to how much a certain household, a family, a person could have. And so to display their status, they would like show off pottery that they imported from a long distance. Humans have always been greedy people. Like, how are you importing pottery to show off that you have this network, this connection way down there, and they sent you a piece of pottery, which eventually these networks will serve as the foundation for the Bronze Age, like elite imports and things like that. So we are in the submerged household 7000 to 5500 BC, and they're like, we're showing off our status by importing pottery. Jump to 5500 to 3500, the emergent household. Things are getting a little more individual, things are getting a little more specialized. People start moving further away. Therefore, because they live further away from the community, they need to be able to self-sustain their own crops, their own grain. They've chosen to move away to develop specialized what have you skills, or they already have that skill, or they have the network to develop that skill. So we get into specialized crops, specialized skill sets in the 5500, 3500 sort of BC time frame. This is the foundation for what will become the elites. Now, in 3600 to 3500 BC and to the early Bronze Age, we get into full-fledged people are in individual households. This is where inequality comes in. Okay, the failure of Neolithic communities to grow beyond the threshold above which egalitarian communities tend to fission and evolve more complex forms of organization speaks eloquently of an absence of permanent institutionalized inequalities that would otherwise have developed if household isolation and competition had been allowed to develop unchecked. Can confirm that does happen. So when the modular household appears at the end of the Neolithic and we get into the early Bronze Age, we're in full swing, households are independent, the marginalized communities start coming up because of the fact that they can no longer rely on the larger community. The larger community doesn't give a fuck, right? Like, that's kind of where we're at this point. And the elites have established themselves, they have their networks, they have their positions of trade. Like, the establishment of these families in key trade routes, in key moments, and having those relationships sets up for the elite of the Bronze Age. Which all this sounds like common sense, right? I don't know why to me it's like revolutionary. I'm like, wow. Therefore, my character at the beginning of the Bronze Age needed to have their family set themselves up in this prime position to be rulers. So now, because of this whole rabbit hole, I'm wondering, who were the elite of the Neolithic? What were the key settlements? And where did those settlements go to become? Like, what did those settlements become? Because the Neolithic set up for the Bronze Age. Now I have an action item to, I have my reading glasses. I would wear them for recording because I think I look better with glasses on, but then like you can see the glare. Maybe, whatever. So not important. I can look like trash and it wouldn't matter. So I have an action item now to research the Neolithic because of the fact that one of my characters is in the early Bronze Age. Another character is in the late Bronze Age, near the collapse of the Bronze Age, yeah? Therefore, I'm studying the collapse of the Minoan society because I want to see how that happens and then try to see what I can take from that to write my story set at the collapse of the Bronze Age. A lot of good stuff that came out of here. I got some notes taken. I got some like little notes. So this is actually like my personal index of things that I want to keep track of. Not a whole lot has happened because I've been over here like in the Neolithic, like, oh my gosh, my mind being blown and asking all of these questions. I love asking questions. I need to write that down. because I'm taking notes over here too. So these are the notes and these are the actions and these are like, I put the related pages. And it's all in reference to this guy. So I am currently on page 41, not anywhere near fantastic progress, but detailed quality progress. The goal actually is to get to page 250 by the end of this weekend. I don't know if I can. I've actually also highlighted specific areas that I kind of want to jump around to. My character is in the Mycenaean civilization. I want to study the Minoan. I can study the Minoan at a later time, but to be able to inform my story, I need to understand the Mycenaean civilization, their practices, their methods. Each of these civilizations kind of have their own specifics, and I want to have a good handle on those going into the rest of my research through the end of July. But I'm gonna take a break. I'm gonna go have a quick lunch, and then I'll be back and I'll keep reading. I don't think I'm straight. That don't quite matter. Whatever. You know, I'm always lopsided anyways. All right, it is officially the next day. I did not check in yesterday before going to bed. It was like midnight when I finally wrapped up. I made progress. I don't know if it's progress that like people would typically write home about, right? So clearly we're annotating very aggressively. There's so much notes, so many questions, so much learning. To begin with, okay, I guess I should have said this earlier. I am an English major. I work in tech. I'm not a historian whatsoever. This is me having fun. I am an amateur historian, amateur queer historian, but I was actually very intimidated going into this encyclopedia. I was afraid I wouldn't understand it. I was genuinely so concerned that I'm like, I am not smart enough to follow this encyclopedia, but I'm like, I can do it. I'm at least gonna give this a solid try. And it's become a really fun, engaging, and just thoughtful read. I'm really enjoying the questions that it's prompting and like just commentary. And something that I didn't anticipate, this book is broken up into, it's specific. So there's multiple sections. Part 1 is background and definitions. I obviously read that because I don't know what I'm doing reading this. Part 2 is chronology and geography. It's broken up by the early, middle, and late Bronze Age, and we cover the Neolithic antecedents as well. I'm not sure what I was expecting with covering the early Bronze Age or how we were even going to identify the differences, like the true differences, and follow the influences between mainland Greece, Crete, and the Cyclades. And I was a little confused and concerned about why we had chosen the lens of pottery. And so I'm just like, I guess that's the only way you can like tell by tracking the pottery. I have come to find out, because that was the most unexpected part of the whole book for me, was I'm like, we are using pottery as a lens to track progress, the years, the influences, the centers of power, tracking all of this through the lens of pottery across the entire Bronze Age gives a consistent and recurring source of truth to root you as you navigate all of this, because every region had their own unique like take on pottery, and then they had their own quality for pottery. They had like certain luxurious pottery, they had other new types of pottery that came out. But the tracking of pottery throughout the Bronze Age provides a level of insight I did not anticipate, and I am loving seeing the world change and socioeconomic evolutions come about through pottery. And like, it might seem obvious because that was one of the most common things was pottery. I mean, everyone needs a pot to cook in, literally. So it was really interesting to see how so much is reflected in something as simple as pottery. And that's also something that will always be left behind because it is always used. If there is a group of people that live anywhere for an extended period of time, settle a place, then there are bound to be remnants of pottery, because you need vessels to hold food, you need vessels to cook, you need vessels to store your food. And then depending on the size of the vessel, you get to see, oh, households did not have storage capacity, therefore it was a more communal living situation. Oh, households now have larger storage capacities, therefore the homestead has become a much more independent unit from the community. There is so much that this is telling me, and I am loving it. Now, I am interested in the early Bronze Age of the Near East, but I was reading about the early Bronze Age and the Neolithic anyways of the Aegean, just to get some context, just to get a larger worldview understanding of the Bronze Age, because I hate pigeonholing myself into, I understand the Bronze Age from this one perspective. I want the Bronze Age as a whole. So understanding the Neolithic and the early and middle Bronze Age, even though for the Aegean, I'm only interested in the late Bronze Age and how it will apply to my story, I still wanted to read the other ones. So my sister, I was telling her, I'm like, look at everything I read, and she's like, to be clear, you only care about this little section. I'm like, yes, but I need the whole thing to understand it, because having a full picture helps me appreciate it. Like the whole pottery situation is just so, for me, it was such a gem because I didn't expect it. I am also taking pretty copious notes. We are kind of straggling right now on the notes because of the fact that honestly, I'll start taking a lot of notes in the late Bronze Age. And apparently the middle Bronze Age is like muddled. So we'll see how that goes. But there's a lot of questions that are being prompted. I have the opportunity to sit and think about this. I have the opportunity to just be in this right headspace, and I have my like map out. So I'm like reading, I'm like mapping, okay, and I keep reading, I take notes, I'm like, And my sister said, you should totally record yourself. I just don't know when I'm gonna have those moments of just like having 5 books out. I'm like, wait, asking my questions. And it is so fun. I loved it. I don't even know how many hours I actually read yesterday, but it was so fantastic. And the notes so far. We're gonna get a lot more, and I'll walk everyone through it afterwards. So I have a notes section. So it's what the note is, and then I put the page number, and then I put the action. Since I don't want to just take copious notes on a notebook, I'd rather just annotate the book itself. But there are moments where I'm like, okay, I need to follow up with these questions. And some of them are fictional because I write fiction. Some of these questions are rooted in fact in history and archaeology. Other questions are rooted in fictitious speculation. Because of the nature of my story, I write queer historical fantasy. So I have to ask questions that start with fact, and they eventually evolve into this fantastical space. So I'll provide an example. Let's see. And I'm realizing that all of my questions are like multifaceted. So one of them was a question regarding deities. Some cities boasted having demigod descendants, having god portals or god altars. Does this influence the prestige of the kingdom? Does this add influence to them as far as trade? Does this add value in their exports or their imports? Were the kingdom centers of spiritual influence or other influence? Did this impact their position on the trade route? Because another question I have is I want to be a little more in depth about where these trade routes are. So I want a map of these trade routes. But that question, the action is identify cities with demigods or that boasted, like in antiquity, that they have a god altar living with them. Track their influences and alliances. Track the flow of trade and the history and the life of the kingdom before, during, and after that demigod was present. What does this say about their ability to sway opinion as the time goes by? I have to clean this up a bit, but that is the question. And as I was writing this, I was telling my sister, and she's like, that sounds like an SAT question. But these are the questions that I'm asking. Like, there's multiple steps to every answer, to every action. I need to think about what this means for the trade route. So now I need to go track down specifically the land and sea trade routes of the Aegean to be able to understand the values, and I want to be able to see the evolution of those trade routes. The late Bronze Age spans so long, so I'm not going to be able to get like, within this 100 years, this is what we were working with. Things shift, which climate changes were one of the main factors in every socioeconomic evolution in the Neolithic and the Bronze Age. Shifts in climate, shifts in weather patterns, shifts in trade routes because of other natural disasters were so influential that it's extremely refreshing now to see historians taking into account climate change into any large shift, particularly between like for example, early Minoan 1 versus early Minoan 2. Even within the early Minoan Bronze Age, there are very clear phases, and most of those transitions, as well as the transitions from early to middle, happen because of not only, migration, invasions, and, normal stuff like that, but climate. This has been extremely fun, super fruitful. I want to get through at least another 100 pages today. I'm hoping I can push 150, but we'll see. So right now I am on page 113. So at 150, that would put me at 163. So I'm gonna try to make it to 175. Hold up, what's 175? In an ideal world, I make it to 200, but let's not be greedy. Oh, 200 is chapter 15, so 175 is probably the middle of another chapter. Yeah, 175 is the middle of another chapter. Oh, and then that would be part 3, thematic topics. And then for the thematic topics, what do I want to cover? Mycenae. Okay. Did we cover the late Bronze Age? Yeah, we will have covered the late Bronze Age today. Okay, so I want to cover the late Bronze Age. I want to start in on some of the thematic topics, and then tomorrow I'll look at events. So let's say goal is 200. Realistically, I might get to 175. But if I get to page 200, I've read a good little chunk of pages. We'll see. Wait a minute, that math was all wrong. I'm just like, wait a minute. Okay, if I'm on page 113, if I want to get to page 150, I need to read 1, 2, 3. That makes way more sense. 363. All right, I'm just kind of like, that is so little. All right, where are we at 363? 360, we are at the end of linear B. I might skip this one and read it later. Cyprominoan. Oh, Mycenaean seals, that's important. Might skip over the hieroglyphic in linear A. Death and burial, yep. Mycenaean religion, frescoes, yep. So I might skip over chapter 26. All right, this makes way more sense. Okay, I might skip over chapter 26, which is right here, this one. And then instead, I'll try to cover linear B. I'll skip that for now. I'm skipping it for now and I'll just read it at a later time. Inscriptions, again, I might skip all of that to get to materials and industries. Yeah, that's what I'll do. Okay, I'm on page 113. I want to get to page 270. Yo, my math's all wrong. I'm gonna stop trying to do this in my head. 300 and something. If I do get to page 300 and something, cooking with gas. All right, 263. So the goal, let's do this again, is 263. What is 263? Well, now that I have that like really nice big chunky bulk, I want the chunkiness. Let's try to get to page 300 at least, okay? After all that mismathing, let's try 300, see where we are. So I will check back later today. This is the progress thus far. Super excited. I'm also identifying the chapters that I read like in depth. So chapter 2, chronology and terminology, was more of a like peruse instead of like a real in-depth read, which is why I didn't check it, but I will be going back to it. The goal this month is to complete this book, and the progress that I'm making right now, I believe that I can do it. I'm prioritizing the ones right now that will prompt me to ask the most questions because I have time to sit and ponder. If I don't read 150 pages today, it's fine. I have time. If I don't read that after this and I like go back to my regular schedule, I'm gonna be like a little stressed out to just be focused and having focus time. But right now, like I have so much time. So I'm gonna do that. I'm gonna go back to reading and we'll see where we get. Y'all ever read an academic article and think there is some dispute happening here? Because I read that article yesterday and it was spicy. Like this professor, this researcher, whom I find out is a university professor at a university, obviously, was just name dropping people. Like, I see we have resistance to change because it would make everybody's like research obsolete. These conclusions or these research hypotheses are irresponsibly formulated and conducted, and I'm just like, okay. Like, I am not sure what's happening here, but it is not my drama, but he's making it everybody's drama. So I was a little distracting. It was fun, but I'm messing with the camera. But I was just like, okay. Like, there was so much just shade being thrown. It was actually distracting, entertaining, but very distracting. So let's update where we are. No, I'm not here. I actually just skipped ahead to stuff that was most relevant to me. Yesterday, I finished the chronology portion of the late Bronze Age. It was very educational, very interesting. I have some timeline questions, as I think we all do. Then I went over to the events portion of the encyclopedia, and the spicy article is about the eruption of Thera or Santorini. And like, I was really looking forward to seeing, like, I guess the influence or the impact of the eruption of Thera and like the working hypotheses. It got into a sass fest. Let me see, I highlighted this because I was like, what is happening? Also, this researcher also, every time they stated a claim that was against like the norm, they cited the whatever. It was their own previous research, and he provided his own graphics. He was like, see my research that contradicts what you're saying. See all of these articles that I've written. So it was quite interesting. Let's see. They also correctly observed the inappropriateness of this other researcher's t-test approach to this type of analytical situation, remarking that it would also rule out something else, another volcano. Those who argue for dates later than this have to entirely ignore or dismiss a large body of high-quality radiocarbon evidence available. There is no sound justification for this position. The arguments on both sides reflect a clear clash of academic cultures and generations. Just, okay, I'm sorry. A clash of scholarly cultures has developed. These simplistic and sweeping would-be teleconnections and hypotheses were undoubtedly naive. This potential direct contradiction of a long tradition of work by archaeologists has been met with stiff resistance over the last 3 decades. Acceptance of such a change would involve some significant reworking of the conventional culture-historical synthesis. It would undermine years of work and publications by many leading figures. As a result, it has to be wrong. I understand. Professor, I am sorry. Also, their bibliography. So everybody has bibliographies, obviously. And it's usually like half a page and then maybe half the back or the whole back. No. That's their bibliography. It is just full packed. They're like, these are my sources, why you're wrong, and why you consistently resist change because it makes your research obsolete. So it was a lot of tea and a lot of drama that I was not expecting to get into. That was a little distracting. On another note, we did get into the Trojan War, which was obviously something that I wanted to get into. So it was extremely, this is the section I've annotated the most thus far. Like, I have so many questions. I have so many pages of like notes and actions that I need to take. I have summaries, I have stuff that I need to do, and I still need to get through the collapse at the end of the Bronze Age. So that one's gonna be what I get through hopefully today. I am gonna go grab some articles. So I'm gonna be heading out soon to the library. I'm really excited with the progress that I've made. It's all coming together. And then, you know how my little sad page was looking a little lonely? Nope, we're filling it out. A lot of stuff happening. Like, I'm really excited. And then, my notes. These are my Quinn histories, fantasy notes. This is where I'm outlining everything. Taking like just notes here and there, right? Okay, so last we left off, I had like this page and I think maybe a little bit on the back or maybe here. But we have since added, and I'm gonna add quite a bit more. So we're definitely getting some good research. And I'm very excited. Key takeaway yesterday. Because of the way that I'm doing research and because I'm a little extra, I'm actually going to try, I want to plot out the historical chronology, which thankfully we have many resources, and I want to map that to the Quinn chronology of the Quinn histories. So I'm excited to see what I glean from that. Also, this level of research is really not necessary. I learned so much about the Neolithic. I learned so much about the early, middle, early late Bronze Age. Like there was so much I learned that I really didn't need to. But all of this additional context helps me create a more full, robust universe, especially for a story that I really want to have a pretty expansive scope. So I'm very happy with the level of research that I am doing, and I'm happy with the potential supporting texts that I'm able to start referencing, because Troy, come to find out, all right, so according to the Iliad, Heracles fought Priam's father or grandfather, might have been his grandfather. So Heracles fought in Troy War 1. We are technically in Troy War 2. We want to talk about the sediments of Troy. I think we're in like Troy 8 versus Troy like 11 or something like that. I have to go back. Maybe Troy 7 versus Troy 9. Because Troy lasted 4,000 to 5,000 years. The Mycenaean civilization quickly rose and fell in the early late Bronze Age to mid-late Bronze Age, and then just collapsed at the end of the late Bronze Age. So Mycenae had a much shorter time to exist than Troy. So there's so much potential for why Troy, one, lasted so long, and two, how they survived the Bronze Age, which I will be reading. So there's just, I didn't realize that Troy had lasted until like 950 BCE from their establishment in 3000 BCE, you know, approximately, versus Mycenae lasted from, from all of like 1700 BCE to about 1000 BCE. That is 700 years against damn near 5,000. That is amazing. So there are many layers of Troy versus, I guess, Mycenae, right? Oh, because because of the collapse of Mycenae that was, I guess, so absolute. Thank you, sea peoples. I need to see the history of the different countries and the trade routes, and I don't know if we have that level of detail. Thankfully, we got pottery, and I'm realizing pottery is like the saving grace and all this chronology. So I'm very excited to figure that out. Also, fun fact, apparently for, to try to get close to at time date references, so to try to like correlate like what was happening all at the same time, Egypt is used as the gold standard. I find that amazing because of the fact that Egyptians were so meticulous in the way that they documented everything and events and dated their stuff. One of the articles said, I guess this one like dating practice implied that Egyptian chronology, like the chronology set up by Egypt, by their scribes and by their like court and record keeper, was off by 100 years. The article was like, clearly not the case. The Egyptians knew what was up. I find that so fascinating. Therefore, it's interesting not only that there are multiple versions of what happened to Troy. Apparently some Egyptian king, Proteus, was like, oh no, Helen was chilling here with us the entire time of the Trojan War. And then there's like letters that are exchanged between the Trojan king and Egyptian kings. So there's so much happening outside of the scope of the Iliad, outside of the scope of the collapse of the Bronze Age, that is just fascinating. And I need to see what happened over there and how the survival of the Bronze Age came about, because Mycenae kind of like went kaput. Also, I find it hysterical that Thucydides, I guess, was calling out Homer, and so was, what was the other historian? There was another historian of antiquity that was like, Homer's totally lying, but he knows that, but he's okay. He's like, he's a poet, he's not a historian. So let's see. Herodotus, he's like, yeah, Homer is lying. Thucydides was like, Homer's totally exaggerating. Clearly there were only 1,186 ships. He's saying 1,200 just because it's more poetic. I love that that's what Thucydides is like, Homer, you're lying, bro. And then Herodotus is like, oh, it makes a greater story, I guess, if they're all there and it's all dramatic. Really though, they were like chilling in Egypt. I find it so fascinating that Homer wrote the Iliad, read the Iliad, what have you, and he only covered specifically the last 51 days, specifically 6 days and only 4 days of fighting with 2 days of truce of the war, because there were other articles and historians and texts that had already told about the rest of the Iliad. There were other supporting known Greek texts at the time that were like, this is the birth of Achilles. This is how Achilles grew up. This is what happened after the war. This is how Troy was sacked. Like, everyone else had already covered everything else. So Homer decided to build upon the bard tradition, I suppose, or the poet, and only covered 6 days of this 10-year engagement, allegedly. We have a lot of supporting text here. That's not what happened. Because everyone else was already talking about everything else. That's hysterical. You get a book this thick because everybody else covered all the rest of the content. Homer's like, yo, I gotta get a book out. We gotta cram 6 days of content into like 1,000 pages, which I'm all here for, obviously. I appreciate it. I just find it so funny. And then like I have to go and read the Odyssey, which I'm gonna do next year. Next year I'm gonna like read the Iliad, the Odyssey, and hopefully the Aeneid, but that one's kind of just, we'll see. But it's just so interesting that Homer's contemporaries are like, he was totally lying. He just likes making stuff up, which is fantastic to think about. Also, I forgot to mention this yesterday. Maybe I did. If I did, I'll edit this part out. Homer kind of set history for the Greeks, as did Virgil for the Romans, I suppose, whatever. Homer set history for the Greeks. The Iliad and the Odyssey are the cornerstone of Greek history, their heroic history. And that is what they have taken as fact of what happened back in antiquity. Even antiquity for them. Hesiod, what does it say in the intro? So let's keep that in mind. Our modern reconstructions of Greek prehistory have always been influenced by the ways in which the Greeks attempt to create a usable account of their own history. Obviously, all of this centered around the Homeric epics, but the establishment of the structural framework seems to have been the work of Hesiod. In his sequence of the 5 ages, and in his ordering of the genealogical traditions in the work known as the Catalogue of Women. I might have already mentioned the Catalogue of Women, but let's grasp this, right? The history of the Greeks was fundamentally set by Hesiod and by Homer. If these texts, one, had been lost, if these texts had been changed, if Homer had chosen to tell the story differently, we would have a different history. The Greek Western classical world, that is the foundation of like Western canon, because you go to a university and tell me if you don't say the Iliad, they scoff it off as like just a niche book. No, that is like fundamental to literary canon. It's almost like writing off Shakespeare. You just don't do that. All of that could have been substantially different if Homer had decided to write it differently. If Hesiod had decided to do things differently, and they were contemporaries of each other. So these two dudes, all within the same like lifetime, defined history as we know it. And that's so exciting to me. That's insane. Because also, I'm gonna go upstairs. I am not too sure how this happened, but I actually don't have my copy of the Iliad. I have 2 or 3 copies of the Iliad. How do I not have a single one? I guess because I'm not actually reading it right now. I was gonna be reading the supplemental text, but I feel like I done goofed. I should probably go get a copy at my library. I forget what I was gonna say anyway, so it's fine, I guess. Point being, I am making so much progress. I am so excited with the way things have come together, with how much context I have now for this book that I'm writing. And I feel, I'm gonna set y'all down. I'm so happy with the amount of context that I'm getting. I feel like I'll be able to write a book that I'm proud of, a book that I'm happy with. I'm extremely excited with the historical context that I'm getting. And because I will also have a much broader understanding of the interconnectivity of the Bronze Age and the relationships between the Aegean and the Near East by the end of the year when I do this same exercise, but for the Near East. So it'll be really, really interesting. I'll probably eventually expand to like Europe and then to the Asias for the Bronze Age, because obviously the Bronze Age didn't just happen in the Mediterranean. That is gonna be a longer term goal for the historical to tell the story of the Bronze Age. I don't know. Might do a historical narrative, and I don't know. I'm fascinated by the Bronze Age, so we'll see. Okay, I'm gonna run to the library and keep reading. check in later. I'm trying to see where I prefer my vlogs because I got tired of sitting in like the same chair in the same position the entire time. So let's see what we think of here and how the audio is, because this is the foyer, so that's like empty behind me, but we'll see. Anyways, I completed, it's been a few days at this point. I had a 3-day focus study of the Bronze Age, which is what this vlog is about. But because of the focus study, I did fall behind on like just regular adulting stuff. So it was a whole lot of catching up this week, which is why it's taken me so long to just wrap up the vlog. But I did read 248-ish pages of the encyclopedia. The goal was 250. I do count like the bibliographies and things like that. I'm not gonna go back and like subtract every bibliography from the chapters that I read, but I got through a good chunk of this and it was really fun. So let's see what I read. Got my handy dandy reference sheet. Bless you. That's my dog, he just sneezed. So I read History of Research just because honestly, I was really intimidated by all of the acronyms and all of the shorthand, and we're talking about LM2A, like that was kind of scary. So I read background and definitions, a little bit of chronology and terminology. Then I started reading the chronology and geography. So this goes by early Bronze Age, middle Bronze Age, late Bronze Age, but we actually start with the Neolithic. So I actually really enjoyed reading about the Neolithic period. I loved seeing the history of it. I loved seeing how the Bronze Age started and the shift away from communal living to more independent homesteads now that we see in the Bronze Age. The early Bronze Age, we have it separated between mainland Greece, Crete, and the Cyclades, and it was also very interesting to see the evolution as well as the decline, because as we know, the Bronze Age did end at the end of the late Bronze Age around 1000 BCE. It was also interesting to note that mainland Greece actually had a very rapid rise and fall in the late Bronze Age. So it was pretty static. It was pretty consistent throughout the early and the middle Bronze Age, and it was Crete and the Cyclades that were kind of thriving. And then in the late Bronze Age, that's when mainland Greece had a rapid rise and then decline. And a note on the collapse of the Bronze Age, I know everyone's out for like the one thing that did it. It did everyone in. It was the one thing nobody could recover from. But to oversimplify the collapse of an entire civilization and a kind of just period civilizations would be an oversimplification and would be an oversight to the nuances of what really happened. There were natural disasters that came into play. There were migrating masses due to natural disasters. There was the very normal seasonal issues. There was a note that said that the Bronze Age has this like image of being extremely consistent and thriving and a natural, incline, a natural rise of power and stability, and it wasn't. There were times of drought, there were times of famine. However, the ruling classes had prepared for that because of the consistent instability in the climate. Towards the end though, it was climate change, it was socioeconomic disruptions, it was migrations of masses from other places that were suffering climate change as well. So it was a very nuanced and multifaceted collapse that didn't take place all in one blow or over a period of short years. There is evidence of repopulation and rebuilding of some sections of the major cities and the major ports. It is nowhere near the height of the middle to late Bronze Age whatsoever. And some ports are eventually abandoned, some cities never recover and are eventually also abandoned. But to say that the Bronze Age came to an end very suddenly, all in one fell swoop, is a misrepresentation, which kind of doesn't fit with my Quinn histories. I kind of want it all to happen in one fell swoop. So key takeaway is to figure out how to do so, but that's for another video. This is just me wrapping up what I read. Moving on, I read some thematic topics. I did read Mycenaean religion because I am focusing on the Mycenaean culture. So I read about Mycenaean religion. I read about the eruption of Thera, the Trojan War itself, and the collapse and the end of the Bronze Age. Before I get to the Trojan War, the eruption of Thera is apparently a hotly debated topic in the archaeology community, in the, I don't know, climatology community. I don't know what community. However, the eruption of Thera / Santorini on page 457 of this book was spicy. Like, I don't know what was going on in the community, but this essay was extremely just, I read some of the excerpts and that was distracting to say the least. Like, I hope they figure out the whole eruption of Thera. What I was looking for was kind of like a chronology, a little bit of evidence, a little bit of, I don't know, narrative nonfiction speculation of what happened to each of the regions. I was not expecting like a tea article of everybody that doesn't want to get on with the show, right? Everybody that doesn't want to get on the bandwagon of progress and scientific evidence. So that was definitely one of the more bizarre articles. It was fun, but I wouldn't say it's exactly what I was looking for. So now I have to go do some independent research about the eruption of Thera, and hopefully we get some articles that are less combative. On to the Trojan War. This section was probably where I got so many of my notes, so much of my just questions, things that I have to think about. The story that I'm telling, if we want to simplify it, is inspired by the Iliad. What I want to do is create a Bronze Age epic about the collapse of the Bronze Age, not just about the Iliad or the Trojan War. Just so happens the Trojan War happened towards the end of the Bronze Age. So it kind of all just like lines up. This article was interesting. It was interesting for many reasons, not least of which I got a lot of context about the Trojan War. The Trojan War that we know is actually told in many different sources. It's documented in many different sources. There are contemporary sources to the Trojan War that talk about it, that talk about some of the kings. And because there's another section here that talks about Troy, it was really amazing to see that the Trojan War was actually just one of many. Maybe that's why there's less like evidence, because Troy was part of Anatolia. It wasn't part of the Aegean. So the attack of the Aegeans on Troy would have been a really big deal in the Aegean. However, for Anatolia, it was probably like, oh yeah, Troy's getting attacked again. Thank God it's been fortified since day one. One of the most interesting takeaways for me is the fact that fortifications of cities actually didn't start until like the mid-Bronze Age. I will have to go back and confirm. But at the beginning of the Bronze Age, we were just moving away from communal habitation and communal society setup. There was no need for fortification. It wasn't until late to mid that we saw fortification. It wasn't until mid to late that we saw fortification of cities, that we saw protections. Troy has been fortified since the beginning. Troy was founded, I think, in 3000-ish BC. Second, Troy 1 is 3000 BC, and it was a small village. The settlement was surrounded by stone ramparts that were repeatedly reinforced. It was a village, and it had ramparts. Troy has always been fortified probably because of its location at the mouth of the Black Sea, because of its importance in port. I need to learn about the importance of Troy because Troy survived the collapse of the Bronze Age. It was founded in 3000 BCE, and I think it went all the way to like 950 BCE or 950 CE. I forget, but it has a span of 4,000 to 5,000 years. So it survived the Aegean, and it was thriving. So this whole Trojan War thing could have actually just been like an ongoing multi-year war by virtue of Troy was always being attacked. So I'm wondering what that means to my Troy, because I think I know what the trigger is going to be, but I need to learn more about Trojan history and like Troy and Anatolia, because Troy had a good relationship with Anatolia. So now I just have to learn so much more about it, because while we know enough about the Aegean, you know, because of settlements and stuff like that, there are actually very few settlements of the Aegean that we have found and excavated. that have been found and excavated. And it is based on those few that the entire history of the area has been able to be reconstructed. So it's really fascinating. But this was really fruitful, super fun. I'm really excited to keep reading it and to learn about the rituals, to learn about the trade, because trade with Egypt was quite common as well. It was a form of status to have goods from so far away. So I'm really interested to see how the Bronze Age just continues to evolve for me. These articles have been extremely educational. Even the spicy tea one, that one was kind of just fun. This has given me so much to think about regarding my world building, regarding the power structures and the trade routes. I am obsessing over the trade routes because the trade routes will dictate who the strong players are. If you aspire to be this amazing kingdom, but the trade route don't touch you because you're on the other side of the mountains and everybody's on this side of the sea, then you're never gonna be in like the thick of it. Which is why Troy was always so wealthy. Troy was always so well fortified. So I need to understand the late Bronze Age trade routes, which I've already found an amazing article on, and I need to see how I have to shift it if I do. So we shall see. But I'm also really interested in like military tactics because there's also other stuff that I want to write about. So this was really fun and I got so many notes. I have even more notes that I need to take. There are questions that need to be like just thought up. I need to really think about how I'm going to build out my world. And I'm realizing for every output, final output, for example, a character profile. For every character profile, there will probably be an essay or a few essays to document the actual history, what we know to be fact at this time, and my creative changes and why I made them, because I want to be able to track that this is what the actual history says, this is Quinn's version of the history, and this is the end product. And it's important for me to be able to keep track of all of that, and it's going to be extreme overkill, but I'm excited to eventually have like, here's my book. And then here's also all of my sources and everything I changed and why. So I'm really excited. I think my friend's like, are you gonna sell like a package of like, this is the book and this is the supplemental text that you can go and reference? I'm like, I'm not sure, but I will absolutely be writing, documenting all of my creative liberties, the creative changes, the reasons that I did certain things. So it's gonna be really fun, really long, and next year. So Bronze Age usually goes May, June, July. That's Quinn Q2. Next year in July, I'm gonna have such a blast. I am gonna have this huge artifact that I'm gonna be putting together, but to do so, I need to have read the Iliad already. I need to have absolutely finished this guy, which I should in the next couple of weeks, hopefully. And I need to have probably read, or at least reread, a lot about just everything I can grab about the Trojan War. And it will probably turn into like a 500 manuscript like scrapbook. So I'm super excited. I've already contacted my friend to let her know like, hey, you're gonna need to bind this for me. I need you to figure out how you're gonna bind 500 to 600 pages. And she's like, okay, what's happening? And I'm just like, outlining, craft style. So that's gonna be a lot of fun. But super enjoyed it. Had so much fun reading this. I have so many thoughts that I'm still putting together, and my action items that I've taken away from all of this for research purposes, my notes on the story itself. I'm just super excited. I don't really expect a whole lot of, I don't even know. I don't expect a whole lot of distraction on this video simply because of the fact it's about the encyclopedia of the Aegean. And it's a 3-day focus study. I have to think about how I'm going to structure the rapid video of this encyclopedia as well as the book talk, because there are some pretty meaningful takeaways that I can discuss. And they're gonna be really specific to my story, to my Quinn's histories. So it's gonna be very interesting. We'll see how it turns out, because this is also gonna be pretty similar for the Tale of Genji. But that's another video. Let me know if any of you find the Bronze Age Aegean interesting. Let me know if you have any questions. Might be able to find them out because I'll be reading these. But we'll see how this goes. Catch you guys next time. Bye!